September 7th, 1191, the coastal plain of Palestine near Arsuf. The air shimmers with heat, but even more intensely with the foreboding of impending catastrophe. Before you stands a multinational host of crusaders scarred by a long, grueling march. They are a living wall of steel and faith led by the legendary indomitable King Richard the Lionheart. To their right, the boundless, shimmering Mediterranean Sea. To their left, hidden within the dense thickets of the forest of Arsuf, something far more terrifying lies in wait. The colossal, numerically superior army of the Ayyubid Sultanate. Leading them is Saladin himself, Islam's champion, a master tactician, the man who just 4 years prior crushed the Christian kingdoms at Hattin and recaptured Jerusalem. He has amassed 25,000 horsemen, light cavalry, and mounted archers, ready to descend upon the exhausted Europeans. Opposing them are just 10,000 infantrymen and 1,200 heavily armored knights, whose armor is melting under the scorching sun. This is more than just a battle. It's the last stand, the point of no return, where the fate of the entire Third Crusade hangs in the balance. Saladin sees them as nothing more than prey, already doomed. How could he not? His forces outnumber the enemy 2-1, his archers are ready to unleash a storm of arrows, and his Mamluks are poised to crush any formation. But King Richard, known as the Lionheart, has prepared something else for him. Not brute force, but a ruthless calculation. Not a chaotic assault, but a deadly, finely honed system. Prepare to witness one of the most decisive, brutal, and tactically brilliant battles of the Middle Ages. This is the story of how iron discipline and tactical mastery crushed unprecedented numerical superiority, changing the fate of the Holy Land. But to truly grasp how these two colossal forces found themselves on this battlefield, and how Richard, seemingly against all odds, managed to turn the tide of history, we need to broaden our perspective and step back in time to the very origins of the conflict that brought them to this point. This is not merely a chronicle of one day, nor simply a dry tally of losses. No, this is far more than that. It's an epic, absolutely monumental clash of two titans of the Middle Ages, Richard the Lionheart, King of England, and Saladin, Sultan of the Ayyubid dynasty. Two of the greatest commanders of their era, whose names became synonymous with martial prowess and strategic genius. Imagine their destinies, their ambitions, their beliefs colliding on that dusty, sun-drenched plain, each of them leading into battle, not just soldiers, but entire civilizations. This story is about the Christian army's unwavering resolve, cool calculation, and unprecedented discipline. Every link in this chain, from the steel-clad knight to the weary crossbowman, had to function as a single flawless machine. They withstood the relentless, furious assaults of the Muslim forces, whose overwhelming numerical superiority was meant to annihilate them. Thousands of arrows, the piercing clang of cymbals, deafening war cries. All of this pounded the Crusaders for hours, attempting to break their will, shatter their ranks, and reduce them to a disorganized rabble. But it was right here, in this hell, that Richard's true genius shone through. It was a triumph of strategic restraint, impeccable timing, and ultimately a devastating, lethal blow that didn't just repel the enemy, but turned the tide of the entire campaign. This is the story of how a single army, exhausted and outnumbered, managed to stand against waves of fury and then, in one decisive moment, strike a blow from which the enemy would never recover. But to understand how these two titanic forces ended up on this field and what led them to such an inevitable and brutal collision, we must turn back the clock to the origins of the global conflict that brought them here. To truly understand the full depth of the confrontation at Arsuf, we need to rewind to a time when the very idea of a Christian presence in the Holy Land hung by a thread. The year 1187 brought disaster. The Battle of Hattin became synonymous with utter and absolute defeat. The Christian army was annihilated, literally ground to dust beneath the scorching sun of the Levant. Saladin, the unstoppable champion of Islam, capitalized on this devastating blow. Within months, he seized Jerusalem, Acre, Haifa, Caesarea, and Jaffa. Most Christian possessions fell to his onslaught. The Holy Land seemed forever lost to the West. In response to this crushing, near-fatal blow, the Third Crusade was launched. Europe, gripped by religious fervor and a thirst for revenge, hurled its massive forces eastward. Kings, knights, entire nations marched to reclaim the holy city. After a grueling and bloody siege, in July of 1191, the Crusaders finally captured Acre, a crucial port city that became a staging ground for further operations. Now, with a reliable supply base established, Richard the Lionheart, King of England, took his next decisive step. His objective was clear and strategically sound: to move south along the coast and capture Jaffa. This port, he understood, was absolutely crucial. It had to become the direct staging ground for the inevitable assault on Jerusalem itself. Without Jaffa, any campaign towards the Holy City would be doomed to fail due to issues with supplies and reinforcements. But Saladin was not just a warrior, he was a masterful strategist. His main unwavering goal was singular: to prevent the recapture of Jerusalem at all costs. He knew that if Richard reached Jaffa, the path to the Holy City would be open. Therefore, the Sultan swiftly mobilized his vast army. His task was simple: to halt the Crusader advance, to crush them before they could fortify their position. The stakes were unprecedentedly high. The fate of the Third Crusade, control of the Holy Land, the glory of two great religions, all of this hung in the balance. Two colossal, irreconcilable wills clashed. But to understand why events unfolded differently this time than at Hattin, and how a relatively small Christian army could challenge Saladin's overwhelming numerical superiority, we must look inside Richard the Lionheart's ruthless machine. But the true, devastating power of the Crusaders lay not only in their legendary steel-clad heavy cavalry, whose charges swept everything before them. It was forged in the crucible of unprecedented discipline, rigorous tactical training, and ingenious logistical support, which transformed Richard's army into an impenetrable moving fortress. Richard the Lionheart, having learned a bitter lesson from Hattin, where heat and thirst devastated the Christian army, organized the advance with fanatical attention to every detail. Imagine this march: the army moved only in the mornings, in the cool of dawn, before the scorching sun of the Levant turned the ground into a blazing furnace. Frequent, carefully planned stops were always made at reliable water sources so that no soldier would fall victim to debilitating heat exhaustion. It was a slow but relentless advance, just 5 Tark 6 kilometers a day, but every step was measured and deliberate, every sip of water worth its weight in gold. As the army moved by land, along the coast, the fleet followed like a relentless shadow. These vessels were more than just transport. They served as a vital lifeline, delivering provisions, water, and reinforcements. For the wounded, they offered the only sanctuary from death in a foreign land. This was truly groundbreaking logistics, ensuring the continuous survival of the expeditionary forces in the harsh desert environment. Now, imagine yourself part of this living monolith. The column maintained an incredibly tight formation, almost impenetrable. The infantry, often scorned by the knights, marched on the landward, most dangerous flank, literally shielding the heavy knights from a hail of arrows from enemy archers. The outer ranks of the infantry consisted of deadly crossbowmen. Their powerful long-range bolts were capable of unhorsing and piercing the light armor of Muslim cavalry, inflicting continuous heavy damage. Richard, with surgical precision, wisely rotated the infantry units, allowing them to rest on the seaward side, so that each warrior remained relatively fresh and ready for the next challenge. It was a steel box moving through hostile territory, its unwavering discipline more potent than any armor. The Muslim chronicler Baha al-Din, an eyewitness to this march, wrote with astonishment, "These people showed wonderful self-control. They proceeded on their way without any hurry." Saladin, on the other hand, relied on overwhelming numerical superiority. His army numbered around 25,000 cavalry, while the Crusaders fielded only 10,000 infantry and 1,200 heavy knights. The Sultan employed his preferred strategy of attrition, relentless, continuous attacks by light cavalry and mounted archers. They would swoop in, raining down thousands of arrows on the Crusaders, then swiftly retreat, attempting to disrupt their ranks, frustrate the knights, and provoke them into a reckless pursuit. But this was his fatal mistake. Muslim archers, despite their overwhelming numbers, often couldn't penetrate the heavy chainmail and plate armor of the Crusaders. As Baha al-Din described it, Frankish foot soldiers marched on with a dozen arrows protruding from their backs, seemingly unharmed. Moreover, their light bows were devastatingly outmatched in range and penetrating power by the powerful European crossbows, which dealt deadly blows to both horses and their riders. Saladin desperately hoped for the Crusaders to break formation under this relentless psychological and physical pressure, but Richard's absolute iron discipline gave him no chance. And so, step by step, this relentless, dispassionate machine advanced. Each day was a trial, every hour torture, and then, after weeks of such a grueling march, two armies, two great commanders, found themselves face to face on a field that would go down in history. Prepare yourself. Now you'll find yourself there in the very heart of this hellish inferno on the coastal plain where one of the most legendary battles of the Middle Ages is about to unfold. Imagine this. It's the hot, humid morning of September 7th, 1191. Palestine. You're one of thousands marching in this relentless steel monolith. Around you, there's dust, sweat, and tension. The scorching Levantine sun is already beating down, draining the last vestiges of strength from every warrior. You feel the debilitating weight of your chainmail burning your skin, the suffocating thirst scratching at your throat. Every step is a struggle, every minute an ordeal. You're utterly exhausted from the multi-day march, each day of which was a relentless, brutal ordeal. The army marches along a narrow coastal plain, just 1.5 to 3 kilometers wide. To their right, the endless, sparkling sea offers an illusion of safety. To their left, the dark, ominous wall of the Arsuf forest, where, as you know, Saladin's army lies in wait, ready to strike at any moment. You can feel its presence, pressing down like suffocating heat. It's a trap, or so it seems. The air is filled with an absolute cacophony of sounds. The incessant clang of cymbals and gongs from the Muslim forces, their piercing, savage battle cries designed to shatter your will. Above your head, thousands of arrows whistle, striking shields, helmets, and, yes, your own armor. You see them lodge in your comrade's chainmail, but surprisingly, they don't pierce through, causing no fatal harm. Your gaze falls upon the iron plate of your neighbor's helmet, the very same kind later found by archaeologists, along with horse harness fittings and horseshoe nails, identical to those used in England and France. And the arrowheads, some designed for piercing armor, others flat, disc-shaped, intended to incapacitate horses. All of this is the brutal reality of this day. You feel every heartbeat pounding in your ears. Fatigue, thirst, constant tension. They try to tear at your mind, but you hold the line. You must. Because not only your life depends on it, but also the lives of everyone marching alongside you. The very fate of the crusade hangs in the balance. Discipline, training, and loyalty. That's what holds you together. One step out of line, one moment of hesitation, and it all falls apart. Hours pass, one after another, an unending torment under the sun. The tension builds to an agonizing peak, and just when it seems your strength is about to give out, when your patience is at its limit through the hellish, deafening roar of enemy attacks, another sound suddenly pierces through. A sound that makes your gut clench and your blood boil. The loud, piercing, deafening blast of trumpets. This is not just a signal, it's the harbinger of a crushing, merciless blow from the knightly cavalry, about to tear through the enemy's ranks. The moment of truth has arrived. The dawn of September 7th, 1191. The Battle of Arsuf began. The Crusader column advanced like a colossal, relentless beast clad in steel. Richard himself, alongside the Duke of Burgundy, rode the length of the line, demanding unwavering discipline. The vanguard, the spearhead of this beast, was made up of the legendary Knights Templar led by Robert de Sable, reinforced by a contingent of Turcopoles, light cavalry capable of fighting in the Turkish style. In the center were Richard's own forces, Frenchmen and Flemings. And finally, in the rearguard, at the point of greatest danger, marched the unyielding Knights Hospitaller, led by Garnier de Nablus. It was they who were destined to absorb the first, most ferocious blow. As all the Crusaders left their camp and began their march toward Arsuf, Saladin's army burst forth from the wooded thickets. This was no mere reconnaissance. This was a massive, crushing blow. First came dense swarms of light skirmishers, Bedouins, Sudanese archers, Turkish horse archers. Following them were ordered squadrons of armored heavy cavalry, Saladin's personal Mamluks, Kurds, and contingents from the emirs of Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia. The Sultan's army, numbering up to 25,000 horsemen, was divided into three sections: the left flank, the right flank, and the center. Saladin personally commanded his forces from beneath his banners, surrounded by his bodyguards and accompanied by the deafening beat of drums. Imagine this hell. The Muslim onslaught was accompanied by the incessant clanging of cymbals and gongs, shrill trumpet blasts, and thousands of battle cries designed to break the enemy's will. Indeed, our people, so few in number, were hemmed in by hordes of Saracens, leaving them no path of retreat. They did not appear valiant enough to withstand so many enemies. No, they were trapped like a flock of sheep in the jaws of wolves, with only the sky above them and enemies all around. A contemporary describes it. Saladin's tactics were brutally simple. Light archers would unleash volleys, then fall back, making way for mounted archers who would attack and then withdraw. This was a proven, wearing-down technique. The Crusader crossbowmen returned fire when they could, but their main objective was singular: to maintain formation in the face of relentless provocation. 6 hours, 6 grueling, interminable hours the Crusaders endured this relentless barrage of arrows and attacks. Their discipline held firm, but the pressure mounted, especially in the rearguard, where the Hospitallers bore the brunt of the assault. The Muslim forces concentrated their attacks on them, trying to shatter their lines, create a breach, and lure the knights into a reckless counterattack. Richard, cool-headed and calculating, waited. He knew his knights had to be preserved for a decisive counterattack at the opportune moment, when Saladin's army was fully engaged in battle and their horses grew weary. But patience has its limits. By midday, as the Crusader vanguard was already entering Arsuf, the Hospitaller rearguard was at its breaking point. The crossbowmen had to load and fire while retreating backwards. The formation inevitably began to falter. The enemy instantly capitalized on this, penetrating any gaps, wielding swords and maces. Garnier de Nablus, the master of the Hospitallers, repeatedly pleaded with Richard to allow an attack. He refused. The order was firm: hold position and wait for the signal. 6 clear trumpet blasts. And then something occurred that threatened to unravel the entire strategy. Unable to endure the relentless onslaught, or perhaps acting on Richard's unspoken permission, the Marshal of the Order of Hospitallers and a knight from Richard's retinue, Baldwin le Caron, burst through their own infantry ranks, and with a cry of "St. George!" charged into the Saracen ranks. Following them like an avalanche came the rest of the Hospitaller knights. The French knights from the corps, marching directly behind the Hospitallers, were swept up by the momentum and likewise plunged into the fray. Was this an act of defiance, or did Richard grant his trusted officers the freedom to seize a fleeting opportunity? Historians still debate this, but one thing was clear: the counterattack had begun. Richard, despite his anger, instantly realized that this advance now had to be supported by the entire army. Otherwise, the Hospitallers would be overwhelmed by the enemy's numerical superiority. He immediately ordered the signal for a full-scale attack. The Crusader infantry parted their ranks, allowing the heavy cavalry to pass. The knights, like steel fists, held back for hours, crashed down upon the Muslims with incredible fury. For Saladin's soldiers, this sudden transformation from passivity to furious rage was utterly bewildering. It seemed part of a prearranged plan. The right flank of the Ayyubid army, already engaged in close combat with the Crusader rearguard, was in tight formation and too close to the enemy to avoid the full impact of this colossal cavalry charge. Many of Saladin's horse archers, to shoot more accurately, had dismounted, and now found themselves utterly defenseless before the avalanche of heavy cavalry. It was a rout. The knights, thirsting for revenge after hours of humiliation, furiously cut down their enemies. Baha ad-Din, positioned at the center of Saladin's army, watched in horror. The rout was complete. He sought refuge on the left flank, but even that was in full flight. He then tried to find Saladin's personal standards, but found only 17 bodyguards and a lone drummer. Richard, always prudent, knowing that reckless pursuit was the greatest danger against armies trained in mobile Turkish tactics, halted the charge after about 1.5 kilometers. The English and Norman units forming the vanguard had not yet been heavily engaged in close combat and served as a ready reserve. The rest regrouped around them. Freed from the pressure of the chase, many Ayyubid troops wheeled around to cut down those knights who had rashly surged ahead. This engagement claimed the life of James Daves, commander of one of the Franco-Flemish contingents. But Richard did not waver. He reformed his squadrons and delivered a second devastating blow, and once more Saladin's forces broke. Richard, leading by example, was in the thick of the slaughter. There was the king, a fierce, extraordinary king, hewing down Turks on every side, and none could escape the might of his hand. For wherever he turned, wielding his sword, he carved a wide path, and as he pressed forward, striking repeatedly with his sword, mowing them down like a reaper with a scythe, the others, warned by the sight of the dying, gave him wider berth, for the corpses of the dead Turks, lying on the ground, stretched for over half a mile. Once again, Richard, ever the cautious strategist, halted and regrouped his forces. The Ayyubid cavalry once again rallied, demonstrating they still had fight left in them, but a third and final charge finally dispersed them into the woods, where they scattered across the hills in every direction, showing no desire whatsoever to continue the conflict. Richard led his cavalry back to Arsuf, where the infantry had already set up camp. That night, the Saracen dead were plundered. The battle was won, but what did this mean for the Third Crusade, for the map of the Levant, for the reputation of the two greatest military commanders? The consequences of this devastating clash were unforeseen and far-reaching. The Battle of Arsuf wasn't just another skirmish in an endless war. It became the absolute and decisive turning point in the Third Crusade, an event that fundamentally reshaped the strategic map of the Levant and the psychological state of both sides. Political and territorial consequences. First and foremost, the Crusaders secured a crucial territorial gain. They gained unprecedented control over the central coast of Palestine, including the strategically vital city of Jaffa. This port city, which Richard had so desperately sought to capture, now served as a secure base for further operations. But this was only the beginning. Saladin, grimly realizing he could not hold his scattered coastal fortresses, was forced to take the humiliating step of evacuating and utterly destroying most of his fortifications in southern Palestine. Ascalon, Gaza, Blanchgard, Lydda, and Ramla all were sacrificed by his own decision to deny them to the enemy. This massive retreat stripped him of control over the entire coastline, creating a continuous strip of Christian territories from Acre to Jaffa, and more importantly, this seriously threatened his position in Jerusalem. Without coastal supply bases, the Holy City became much more vulnerable to a future Crusader offensive. Arsuf, therefore, became the foundation for the resurgence of Christian states in the Levant. Moral and cultural changes. The psychological impact was just as powerful as the physical one. The victory solidified Richard's reputation as a great warrior and a brilliant commander. He proved he could not only lead an army, but also win decisive battles against a numerically superior enemy. He became the embodiment of knightly valor and strategic genius. At the same time, Arsuf irrevocably shattered Saladin's aura of invincibility, which he had acquired after his triumph at Hattin. Although his army was not completely annihilated, Richard wisely halted the pursuit. It was routed, scattered in an ignominious flight. For the Muslims, this was an unbearable humiliation, while for the Crusaders, it was an incredible boost to morale. Saladin, stunned by the sudden and devastating effectiveness of the counterattack, no longer dared to risk a full-scale battle, preferring only harassing skirmishes, which now yielded little benefit. Tactical takeaways. Arsuf became undeniable proof that the iron discipline of a defensive march, combined with a powerful, well-timed counterattack by heavy cavalry, could decisively defeat numerical superiority and attrition tactics. Richard demonstrated how an apparent disadvantage, constant provocations, could be turned into a deadly trap for the enemy. It was a masterclass in tactical control. The Battle of Arsuf is more than just a page in history. It's a timeless lesson about leadership, systems, and the fragility of empires. And to fully grasp the depth of this lesson, we must look beyond the battlefield, into the enduring principles that led to this monumental victory. The Battle of Arsuf is more than just a page in the dusty annals of history. It's a timeless, enduring lesson about leadership, discipline, and strategy that continues to resonate through the centuries, relevant for medieval kings and modern leaders alike. Richard the Lionheart, on this blood-soaked plain, demonstrated exceptional strategic patience that bordered on madness and unrivaled tactical mastery. He didn't merely win the battle, he showed how to transform a potential impending disaster, the Hospitallers' breakthrough, into a decisive, crushing victory. His iron will, his unwavering ability to maintain order amidst utter chaos were the key to a success that altered the course of an entire crusade. This battle, brutal and uncompromising, irrefutably proved discipline, organization, and flawless logistics can overcome overwhelming numerical superiority and the most sophisticated attrition tactics. Richard's army was smaller and more worn out, but its iron discipline and ruthless calculation made it an invulnerable moving fortress. While Saladin relied on waves of attacks and psychological pressure, Richard built his victory on a foundation of dispassionate efficiency and absolute control. The Battle of Arsuf forever demonstrated that even great leaders and vast armies can be defeated when confronted with superior tactics and an Mahiri unyielding will. This was not a clash of brute force, but rather a contest of minds and wills. In this confrontation, Richard arguably proved superior to Saladin, showing that control, composure, and precise calculation can be a karubarish, far more powerful weapon than any numerical advantage or the ferocity of an assault. Ultimately, Arsuf is a masterclass in control and restraint. It's a reminder that victory is achieved not just by the sword's edge, its steel might, but also by knowing exactly when to draw it, when to deliver the decisive single blow. This lesson, forged in the dust and blood of medieval Palestine, remains absolutely relevant even today for anyone striving for victory under immense pressure and against overwhelming odds.